Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes pretty fast if you're the car chick. Now, here she is.
Welcome, everyone. Today on the Straight Shift, we are going to talk about fluids. Not wine or coffee, sorry, not those kind of fluids, but the fluids that are in your car. Now, that may not sound like the most exciting topic, but the fluids in your car are the single most important component of your car's maintenance routine. If you've ever heard of someone who has had their car go 200,000 miles, 300,000 miles, maybe even 400,000 miles, and you thought, wow, how did they do that? I guarantee you they changed fluids religiously in that car. So today we're going to talk about what all those fluids are, why they're important, what they really do, and how often should you really be changing them. You may have gone to your mechanic recently for an oil change, and they've told you you also needed a transmission flush or a coolant flush. What does that mean, and why is that important, and do you really need that? Most people think about changing fluids in their car, they think about their oil. But the oil is just one of several fluids that are important. And today I'm going to cover the top 6 fluids. They're the main ones in your car, and you're going to learn what they are, why they're important, and how often about you need to change them. So what do fluids actually do in your car? Well, different fluids do different things, but in general, they do one or more of the following. They lubricate, they cool, and they make hydraulic systems work. So the first one I want to talk about is the big one, engine oil. The purpose of engine oil is it protects your engine, it lubricates all the moving parts in your engine, and it cools your engine because as all those mechanical parts are working furiously to move your car down the road, they get really, really hot. And the oil actually helps with the cooling process along with the coolant and everything else. So oil is really, really important. You can kill any car, even something as reliable as a Honda or a Toyota, if you don't change the oil. Now, there's some misinformation, or maybe it's just out of date information in the market. Most people, when they think, how often should you change your oil? They think, oh, every 3 months or 3,000 miles. And that used to be true. It's not so true anymore. The oils have gotten a lot better. And the engine tolerances with the way the car engines are manufactured have also gotten more sophisticated. So if you have a car, that's 10 years old or newer, maybe even 15 years old or newer, look at your manual because it may say that your oil change interval may be 5,000 miles instead of 3,000 miles. It also depends on what type of oil you are using. If you're using conventional oil, which is more of, a natural oil that comes out of the ground, it's a petroleum byproduct, or if it is a synthetic oil, we talk about full synthetics. Synthetic oils, you can go longer than you can with conventional oils because they have so many more chemicals in them that make them last longer than what Mother Nature produces. This is one of the few times where we actually make something better than Mother Nature did. So if you're using a conventional oil, you probably do want to have an oil change interval somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 miles, depending on your car and how you drive it. If you're using a full synthetic, you may be able to go 7,000, 7,500 miles between oil changes because that fluid, it can just go longer. I use full synthetic in Maggie. She's my 2004 Mini Cooper S, and I drive her pretty hard, but I can easily go 7,500 miles between oil changes, and it's fine. It doesn't do any damage to the car. I have had that oil tested through a company called Blackstone Laboratories. If you ever want to be really geeky and learn about your engine oil, for I think it's 25, maybe $35, you can Google Blackstone Labs. They will send you a little kit, which looks a lot like the thing the doctor gives you when they want to take a certain sample. But you basically put a little bit of the old oil that you take out of your engine when you do an oil change, put some of that into the little container and you ship it back to Blackstone Labs, and they do this big analysis on it and tell you, how that oil has broken down, and tell you, should you be changing it more often than you are, or can you go a little bit longer? And I had mine tested at 7,000 miles and they said, hey, this is actually still pretty good. Go 7,500. I don't recommend going more than 7,500. So some cars, some manufacturers, the European cars are terrible about this. A lot of them, like BMW and Mercedes, used to have a 15,000 mile interval. Many used to tell you this. And so people were going 15,000 miles between oil changes. And what was happening was the oil was getting really nasty. New oil should be a nice light honey gold color, kind of like a cheap American beer. But when as fluids get old, they get dirty because of the heat cycling. There's chemical breakdowns. They pick up metal particulates from the engine parts that are microscopic and are floating around. This is why you have to have a laboratory analyze your oil if you choose to do so. But basically, when your oil starts to look light brown, kind of like maybe a lager, if you're a beer person, it's time to change it. When your oil looks like Guinness, you've gone way too long and you've already damaged your engine. And on these European cars going 15,000 miles, the oil was nasty, nasty dirty, and it was causing the tensioner systems for the timing chains and the timing belts to get all gummed up, and those were failing, and boom, either you had your engine smoking because there were seals and gaskets being damaged, or if you have a timing belt or a timing chain fail, that can be catastrophic. It's like a bomb going off inside your engine. So the European manufacturers, for the most part, have at least scaled down and said, okay, every 10,000 miles. I have still seen the oil at 10,000 miles. It is too dark for me. I say, and most of your ASE certified mechanics will agree with me, 7,500 miles. This is just not something that you want to take a risk with, because it is the single most important fluid in your car. Now, you may be wondering about the numbers of oils. You'll see 10W40 or 5W30. What the heck does that mean? Well, that is a measure of the viscosity of the oil. In other words, kind of how well it flows. The lower the number, the thinner that oil will be at 100 degrees Celsius. Now, the W in there, that actually stands for winter. It doesn't stand for weight or anything fancy. It stands for winter. And so it refers to the number right before the W, like 5W. That refers to how well that oil is going to work when it's really cold out and you're starting the engine cold in freezing temperatures. So the lower that number before the W, the better that oil is going to work in cold winter temperatures when you start up your car, meaning you're not going to have to let your car sit there and warm up for 15 minutes before you safely drive it. So make sure you know what the right type of oil is for your car, because a lot of the quick lube places, if you just kind of go to wherever for your oil change, they're going to use whatever oil they have in bulk because it's the cheapest. But it may not be the right oil for your car. So number one, make sure the shop is putting the right oil in your car, because let me tell you how many times I have seen shops put the wrong oil in a car simply because they were being cheap and lazy. So know what the right oil is for your car and make sure the shop is putting the right stuff in there. That's how you're going to maximize the life of that engine and maximize its performance as well. Cars are designed to work with certain types of oils. Engineers spend lots of time and money figuring this stuff out, so don't argue with them. So again, don't go more than 7,500 miles between oil changes with a full synthetic. If you're still using conventional, ask your mechanic if you can switch to a synthetic, because you can go longer and it takes up less of your time taking your car in for oil changes, and it puts less waste oil back into the environment because you're changing it in the filter less often. So I'm a big fan of full synthetic oils. The second oil that is really important is your transmission fluid. Now, this is for cars with automatic transmissions. Those of us that drive cars with the proper number of pedals, which is 3, meaning it's a manual transmission, and we have a clutch, that uses a different fluid. That's an oil, and it does have to be changed, just not as often. But most people are driving automatics these days. And so automatic transmission fluid is extremely important. This cools and lubricates your transmission. And there's also, it serves as a hydraulic coupling between the engine and the transmission. So, that means if the fluid is low or it's nasty, it's going to start causing damage to your transmission. Things aren't going to work properly. If you've ever had a car that starts shifting really rough, or maybe it won't go into a certain gear, that's what we call the transmission is slipping. That usually means that you haven't maintained the fluid and it's starting to cause damage to the internal transmission parts. This is a really expensive repair. It is much cheaper to just change your transmission fluid often enough to keep it nice and fresh and keep that transmission happy. Now, how often should you change automatic transmission fluid? It really depends on how you drive and also your vehicle. On some vehicles, some of the Fords, any mechanic who has worked on Volkswagens will tell you 30,000 miles, change it at 30,000 miles, because it's just not as good. Some manufacturers, and I'm going to call out Volkswagen here, they have in the past said, oh, you never have to change the transmission fluid. It's a lifetime fluid. The lifetime of what? A grasshopper? There's no such thing as a lifetime fluid. And I have verified that with multiple master certified technicians and automotive engineers. There is no such thing as a lifetime fluid. Nothing lasts forever. So typically, most transmissions, automatic transmissions, you should change your fluid anywhere from 30,000, up to 50 or 60,000, depending on the car and depending on how you drive. This is something that your mechanic should be checking at every oil change to keep an eye on that fluid. Automatic transmission fluid is a pretty kind of, reddish pink color when it's new, and it starts to get more and more brown as it gets older. So that's when it starts to get brown, it's time to change it. Now, if you have one of these newer, what's called a CVT or continuously variable transmissions, that's kind of a whole new animal. They were originally designed to be an enclosed system, meaning you don't even get a dipstick to check it. It was designed to never be changed originally, but then they started having problems with these transmissions. So I'm seeing the manufacturers change their tune on that and say, yeah, you do need to change it, and it's making it into some manuals. But if you have one of these transmissions, definitely check your owner's manual and call your service department at the dealership and say, hey, how often should I really be changing this? Because there is no such thing as a lifetime fluid. And my kind of generic rule for, if you have to throw out a number out there, around 40,000 miles is a good time to change most transmission fluids. So again, check your owner's manual, but transmission fluid, very important. The next fluid I want to talk about is your engine coolant. This is the stuff that goes through your radiator, and it moves the extreme heat temperatures, the extremes that are build up in your engine while it's moving. It moves everything. It circles through the radiator where it cools off and circles back. So this is the biggest thing that helps cool your engine. And if you've ever had your engine overheat, it's probably because you had a leak and you were, your water pump was leaking and you were low on that coolant and it caused your engine to overheat. We even had a Honda that we started losing coolant on the racetrack and ended up finishing the race with no coolant in the car whatsoever. And it was a miracle the thing didn't blow up. So coolant is really important. And you may also hear it referred to as antifreeze. People up north tend to call it antifreeze because they think about it in the winter. It does, because it's a mixture of antifreeze and water. That's because in warmer temperatures, you can run pure water through it. You don't have to run the antifreeze component. And on the racetrack, we have to run just water. But up north, you can't run just water through that system because it will freeze. So you have to put the chemical stuff in it to keep it from freezing, and that's the antifreeze or coolant. Usually a 50-50 mixture is what is going into most cars and should go into most cars. And that antifreeze component, the chemicals, that's the stuff that's really dangerous. So, you've heard them warn about if you have a leak and it drips onto your garage floor and your dog licks it up, it can kill them. And it has a sweet smell, which can attract pets and children. So you do have to be really careful with that stuff, that your kid and your pets don't get into it. So how often do you need a coolant flush or to change that chemical? Really, whenever it gets dirty or it chemically loses its ability to cool. This is not something that most people can tell for themselves. A mechanic is going to do 2 checks. They're going to do a visual check. They're going to look, is there buildup in it? Is it dirty? Is it foggy? Do they see corrosive buildup in the fluid? And they should also test it with a hydrometer. And what that's going to do is that is going to check what the freezing point is of that fluid. It basically tests what is its ability to still cool. It starts to get into chemistry and it's very complicated. So again, your mechanic should be checking these things for you. You as a driver should check that coolant reservoir, know where that is in your car, and check it to make sure that at least the level is up to the line where it's supposed to be. Because if it starts to drop and you don't have enough of that coolant running through your system, that's when your engine's going to overheat and it could go bluey. How often can you go by a mileage thing? Every manufacturer is different, and I'll tell you, they're all over the board. Sometimes they say every 30,000 miles. For some manufacturers, they don't even put it on the maintenance schedule, which is really unhelpful. Hyundai says, do it at 60,000 miles and then every 30,000 after that. Mercedes has some engines where they'll say, we don't have to worry about it for 120 or 150,000 miles. I think that's probably a little bit long. So again, something your mechanic should be checking starting at 30,000 miles, and just keep checking every time you get your oil changed so that they stay on top of that for you. You should just make sure that you check the levels every now and then to make sure that you're not running low, meaning that there's a leak somewhere in that system, often the water pump. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about power steering fluid, brake fluid, and differential oil. I'll be right back. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of, or about finding the right car at a fair price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 888-575-2138. That's 888-575-2138. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
Where the rubber meets the road.
Nice to meet you. Love your asphalt.
Hey, nice treads.
It's Straight Shift with the Car Chick.
And we're back talking about all the fluids that are in your car, what they do, and why it's so important to keep them changed at the proper intervals so that your car lasts as long as it possibly can. If you want your car to go 200, 300, 400,000 miles, the first thing you need to do is stay on top of these fluids and make sure you're changing them religiously. Now, we've talked about engine oil, transmission fluid, and engine coolant. Now we're going to talk about power steering fluid. Most cars that have power steering, it's a hydraulic system. And so the power steering fluid makes the hydraulic pump and cylinder work. They assist the driver in turning the car. If you have ever driven a car that does not have power steering, one, you probably have built up some serious upper body strength, but you know how difficult it is. And if you've never had the experience of driving a car without power steering, you've been spoiled and always had power steering, it would be a really rude awakening if your power steering suddenly went out. We do not have power steering on the race car, which on the racetrack is fine driving it at slow speeds in the paddock. Let me tell you, it is quite a workout. So that power steering fluid is what is going to keep the power steering rack in your car working so that you don't have to kill yourself making the car turn left and right. Power steering fluid is usually red. It's very similar to, and sometimes on some cars, it's actually completely interchangeable with automatic transmission fluid. Some cars actually use the same fluid for both. But if you have a leak in that system and you're losing fluid, or the fluid is nasty dirty because you've never changed it, that can cause damage to the power steering pump. And when that pump starts to fail, the first thing you'll hear is a whine. You go to make a left-hand turn and you might hear this whining sound like the car is complaining about turning. That's the power steering pump most likely complaining that something is wrong and it's starting to get damaged if it's not already good and damaged. So then, next up, if you actually feel, I've had power steering literally go out on me in the middle of a turn. Now, that was due to an electrical problem, not the power steering system itself. But that's really dangerous because you're sitting there, and you're accelerating through a turn, in the middle of a turn signal at a, green turn arrow at a red light, stoplight. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, you can't turn the car anymore. And you're careening towards this power pole or telephone pole. That's really scary and really dangerous. So make sure that you are maintaining the power steering fluid in your car, because if it does fail and you have to replace the power steering pump and even the power steering rack, the mechanical rack in the car, that isn't cheap. That's going to be at least $1,500, if not more. So power steering fluid, it does vary by vehicle and manufacturer, how often they say to change it. And it can be anywhere from 30,000 miles up to 100,000 miles. So again, this is a fluid that you want your mechanic to be checking. And when it starts to get dirty, boom, you change it. It's just not something you want to mess with. The next fluid I want to talk about is brake fluid. This fluid is kind of unique. On one hand, it's extremely flammable, which, can be entertaining, but also dangerous. But it's also one of the few fluids in your car that is what is called hygroscopic, and that's hygro with a G. Maybe this is a new word for you. Google it. But what it means is it absorbs moisture from the air. So, oil and transmission fluid, with the oil, they say, change it every, 3 months or 3,000 miles. That actually doesn't make any sense because oil doesn't go bad just sitting. So for example, my mom only drives, she's retired now, so she only drives like 4,000 miles a year. So, she's not getting her oil changed every 3 months just because time has passed. There's no need to do that. We change her oil maybe once a year and she's fine. Oil and most fluids don't just go bad by sitting there and existing. Brake fluid actually will, because it does absorb moisture from the air. And the reservoirs that hold the brake fluid, they're not 100% airtight. So air does get in. And if there's a lot of moisture in the air, if you live in a really humid place like Louisiana or Florida, your brake fluid may go bad a lot faster than someone who lives in, say, the Nevada desert. Brake fluid goes through a lot of heat cycles. So when you hit your brakes, the purpose of the fluid is it acts as a hydraulic mechanism for clamping, pushing down your calipers and pushing that brake pad into your brake rotor, which create friction, which stops the wheel, which stops your car. So when you hit the brakes and the harder you hit them, the more heat builds up and that fluid gets really warm. And that also can allow moisture to build up in it because you can actually boil brake fluid. I've done it. It doesn't normally happen on the street. It happens on the racetrack. And that's why we use a different type of brake fluid in our track cars and race cars that can handle the higher heat. But it's not a lot of fun when it happens. If your brake fluid is bad, or if you have, a lot of moisture buildup in there, or if you've got air in your brake lines along with that fluid, what happens is your brake pedal starts to feel squishy, and you push that pedal and it's like pressing on a wet sponge, and it goes all the way down to the floor, and the car doesn't stop. That is not fun to have happen anywhere, whether you are on the street coming up to a stoplight or you're on the racetrack at 140 miles an hour coming into a turn. So maintaining your brake fluid is really important. You really should have them change the fluid anytime you have to get new brakes. Part of that brake job should be changing and putting fresh fluid in your car. Now, there are a lot of shops that I have seen be really freaking lazy about this, and they don't bother to change the fluid, either because the mechanic forgot or more likely was simply too lazy and was just trying to get it all done fast and didn't care. The brake fluid should always be changed when you get new brakes, whether you're, getting your rotors resurfaced or you're turned or you're getting new rotors with new pads. Anytime they're touching your brakes, they need to be putting new fluid in it. And for most people, that will be plenty of an interval for those brakes to, for that fluid to stay fine. Now, if you have a car that you don't drive a lot, maybe it's, that convertible that you only drive on Sundays, and you could go 10 years, before you blow through a set of brakes. That car, you're going to want to probably change the brake fluid, a little more often, depending on where you live and how humid it is. That might be once a year. It might be once every 2 years. Again, that's something to talk with your mechanic about and see what is an appropriate interval if you have a car that you don't drive on a regular basis. I change mine all the time because every time we go to the track, we flush the brake fluid, we put the high potency fluid in. When we come back, we drain that out and we put regular fluid in. But most people are not doing those type of things. So you need your mechanic to help you figure out what's that right interval. But you as an owner, make sure the shop changes your brake fluid anytime you get a brake job. And finally, I want to talk about differential oil. This is one that you may not have even heard of. The differential in your car, that's the gearbox that allows the drive wheels on your vehicle to turn and therefore propel your car forward. If your car is front wheel drive, the differential's in the front. Imagine that. And in that case, the diff actually tends to share fluids with your transmission. So you may not have a separate differential oil in your car. It may just work with the transmission fluid. That's, a question to ask your mechanic. Or if differential fluid is not mentioned anywhere in your maintenance schedule and you have a front wheel drive car, means you probably don't have it. And great, you don't have to worry about it. Now, if your car is rear wheel drive, the diff is in the back. Imagine that. If you have four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, guess what? You have two differentials for the price of two, meaning you have to change the oil in both of them. It serves as, again, a lubricant and a cooler for the parts in rear-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles. It's called differential oil, but that does not mean that it's the same as engine oil. It's actually a very, very different type of oil. It's much, much thicker, and it's almost clear. It's not even that warm honey color. So it's also not something that you can check easily yourself. The mechanic has to get underneath your car, typically when it's on a lift, and, pull the drain plug, assuming your car even has one, and take a little bit of a sample of it. The good news is it doesn't usually need to be changed that frequently unless you've got a big SUV and you're towing heavy stuff with it all the time and that diff is working really, really hard. Most vehicles, it's between 60 and 100,000 miles when you have to change it. And again, it depends on the vehicle and how you drive the vehicle. Towing will cause that diff to work harder, and you will probably have to change that fluid more often. Again, this is something that your mechanic needs to be checking every now and then. Even if you're not at the mileage on your maintenance schedule, which says check this thing, it's just a good thing for the mechanic to get in the habit of doing, because just because your maintenance schedule says every 60,000 miles, that's not a hard number. That is a good guess by the manufacturer based on how they built that car, what fluids they require, and, kind of an average for the average driver. That leads me to mention there are usually 2 maintenance schedules in your owner's manual. And if you have not read your owner's manual, get it out, open it. You don't have to read it word for word every single page. It's a little bit dry and boring. It'll put you to sleep at night, but at least pull up the section on the maintenance schedule and read through it and see when different things are in fact due. So, do you look at the normal schedule or do you look at the severe schedule? Most people think severe and they think, people that live in the desert and it's 110 degrees, or they live, up in northern Minnesota and it's really freaking cold. That's not actually what the term severe means. Severe means, is the car and its various components working harder than average? So if you commute in stop and go traffic every single morning and evening, and that's the majority of the driving you do, stop, start, that's actually much harder on your car than if you, drive across the desert, and keep it at a nice steady 45, 50, 55 miles an hour. If you're doing a lot of towing with your vehicle, that puts more wear and tear on the car. That is considered severe. So talk to your mechanic about the type of driving that you do and how you're driving and how you're using your vehicle. And he or she should, if they really know their stuff, will be able to take that information, combine it with looking at all the fluids in your car. And this is why it's a good idea to have a relationship with one mechanic who kind of gets to know you and is keeping an eye on your car, kind of like your doctor keeps an eye on you and your body. That way that person can kind of know what your car really requires based on your unique driving. And that will help them tailor the maintenance to, number one, maximize the life of your car, while also maximizing the efficiency of the money that you're spending. Because if the schedule says change this fluid at 60,000 miles, but your mechanic looks at that fluid and it's like, wow, that fluid still looks brand new, we really don't need to change it, then you might be able to go a little bit longer. It really depends on how you drive. So get a good relationship with a good mechanic and keep on top of these fluids. That is the key to making your car last a long time and have it start and run and get you to where you're going every day safely and efficiently. I know we've gone a little bit over the normal 30 minutes, but this was really important information to get out to you guys. I hope it was helpful. Drive safely and take care of those cars. I'm out of here.
The Straight Shift Podcast is copyright LeeAnn Shattuck, the Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of LeeAnn Shattuck or the Car Chick.